Hello, and welcome to Chat DPS. This is your new podcast channel, talking with myself, Nick Lovell, and my very good friend, Robert Feldman. DPS is an organization that provides products and services to highly regulated industries, or those that really do care about being guardians of the data of which they take care of. Robert, obviously the objective here today is to give a short and punchy, 15 minutes about, things that are happening in the big wide world at this moment in time, news stories that maybe haven't been aired on general news stations. I think one of the things that sort of struck me over the course of the last week has been this whole story with regards to cars collecting data. And it kind of made me think a little bit more about, the role of the car. Why is the car collecting all this data? I mean, just because it can, should it? I suppose is the question. And it's not just, your BYDs. It's which is a Chinese company, for goodness sake, that's collecting it. It's also somebody called Elon Musk, who has just been appointed as in the new Trump cabinet, or he's a very senior role in the government over in the US. He also owns X and has been quite deliberate about the fact that he's using X for his AI exploits. And we now know that Tesla has been collecting data along the way. A couple of conflicts of interest in there, maybe?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, it's an interesting piece, isn't it? One because it seems so wide ranging. I know the article focused on maybe 10 car manufacturers, and I think it's probably safe to say that from a consumer's point of view, most modern cars which are connected in some way or another, there's likely to be some sort of collection of data going on. I think the issue with Tesla in particular, putting aside the whole politics side of things, if we can for a moment, is that they may be collecting voice instructions, they may be collecting visual. So we know that Tesla collects both internal and external camera images. So it may be that Tesla goes a little bit beyond some of the other car manufacturers at the moment. But I think the key thing is awareness, because I'm not sure how many car owners are actually aware of the privacy data, the personal information that may be being collected by these car manufacturers.
It's an interesting one. I mean, the killer for me was the fact that, it's been often spent $44 billion. I mean, just a drop in the ocean, for you and me. I mean, it's, it's pocket change, isn't it? And he's dropped $44 billion on buying what was Twitter, made a big thing about calling it X. And now it seems to be a big AI data collection exercise for his own AI purposes. I mean, that in itself, alongside, I'm collecting a load of data from cars, that I've put out on the road. And Tesla have got a, fairly significant head start in terms of people that have been buying them for a concerted period of time. Plus now, the role in the government is, it can't be seen surely as, hey, this is a great thing.
Yeah, I think you could probably argue that some of these car manufacturers are essentially data harvesting companies with a car business on the side. That's probably there's probably more value in harvesting and using that data through their AI systems or selling it as probably as much as in the actual sale of the vehicle itself. And so I guess that there's probably that. But I guess, thinking about the personal information, the privacy side of things, I think it comes back to, well, there's probably a couple of things. One is, do people really care about this sort of thing? How many people would even be aware that these car manufacturers are using their personal data, and how many of them would be aware they're using it to the levels of, say, a Tesla is supposedly doing. You have this kind of dichotomy that goes on, where on the one hand, people are sharing data quite willingly, social media, but get quite concerned when an Optus or a Minibank or Latitude-sized data breach comes along, and you find out that information that you gave 10, 20 years ago is still being held by these organizations. So you've got this dichotomy between people just sharing all the time, either willingly through social media, for example, and maybe inadvertently or unknowingly through connected devices. And, cars are, becoming more and more connected, more sensors, more cameras, like I say, voice commands, all these great new technologies. But the question is, how is that information being used? And then in more particularly, how is that being communicated? Because it seems as though when it comes to the collection of this data, whilst the actual collection itself may be sort of buried within the privacy policies, these things seem to happen on like the consumer needs to opt out. So by default you're opted in, and you actually need to be aware that you've been opted into the sharing of your personal information, and then the consumer is the one who has to put the effort into opting out.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because most of us have been caught out with that thing on LinkedIn about, sort of pushing. They assume that everybody was was just going to accept everything and it was all good. But then quite a few people decided that they didn't particularly want their data being used for AI purposes because they don't really know where it's going or what it's doing, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I guess this is just what happens, isn't it, with a lot of social media is that they exploit their vast consumer databases and consumer groups to their own ends. So, they're taking voice, whatever other activities that their customers get up to, and they're generating new technology revenue off the back of that.
Yeah,
and we're the ones who the ones that are getting harvested for little or no return. Well, I guess the return is the use of the platform, but is that a fair return?
Yeah, when I set up this thing, when we started this particular conversation, I was saying that it's DPS actually serves that highly regulated sort of industry space, but we're also working with organizations that give a damn about their rights, as what their rights are with regards to being guardians of the data. Where are we up to with this? Because there's changing sort of like legislative areas around, sort of like, organizations have now got to be, responsible citizens, and they've got to do various activities in order to be, seen as good guardians of the data and what have you. Are there any highlights in the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks around that?
There's been a bit of activity around privacy reform. So this has been talked about for several years now, and then we started to get a little bit of activity from the government. The first reaction was in relation to Optus and Medibank, where they increased the maximum penalty to a minimum of $50 million. And then about a year ago, we started to see from the Attorney General's Department the first tranche of Privacy Act reforms come through. When the initial consultation paper was released, there was over 100 different reforms that were looked at, where it looked as though Privacy Act in Australia will be getting much closer to GDPR, and we'd see a real shift in rights going to individuals and much more responsibility going on to entities covered by the Privacy Act. And then within that, there was talk about getting rid of the small business exemption, which so at the moment you have to have a turnover of at least $3 million to be covered by the Privacy Act. So they was looking at extending the coverage of the Act to pretty much all businesses in Australia. So there's a lot of talk about some fairly significant reform. However, when the first tranche of reforms were released, it was a much reduced subset of reforms being put forward, and which has gone into the bill that's being considered right now in Parliament. So there's been a bit of activity around that. The Senate committee has been looking into the proposed bill, has looked at, made some recommendations around change. So I think the big thing really to say is that the changes that are coming through are sort of like the low-hanging fruit. It's not the major changes that people were hoping for. It's not taking things to this sort of GDPR type level of.
We've got a watered down version then. We've got a bit of a watered down version.
Yeah, so when it comes to something like this Tesla and these other car companies collecting personal information, so one of the things that hadn't been looked at in the overall review of reforms was like a fair and reasonable test for entities to actually have to kind of review how they collect and use personal information and figure out, are they doing that in an objectively reasonable way? And then that would have pushed a need to update their privacy policies and possibly even having to get consent again from their customers or consumers. There was also talk about broadening the definition of personal information to include greater amounts of data, particularly around things like IP addresses and other types of indicators companies can actually take around your identity when you engage with them online and even in a car. But those things are not in the first tranche. I suppose that's the thing to say. So in terms of, what does this article mean right now? Not a lot. What are the practical steps you can take? What are the practical steps you can take as an individual? Like I said before, it's all about you've got to opt out because the law is not going to help you at this stage. The reforms coming through are not going to change anything around putting more obligations on these car companies to do the right thing or to do a different thing, because at the moment, first tranche is all
about. There's a couple of things there, though.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things there. I mean, and the point here is the fact that storage isn't cheap, right? So, I mean, they're collecting all this data and they're putting it into a storage device, and the storage device then, they've got to do manipulation, all the other bits and pieces of that data in order to make it into, sort of data, information, knowledge, I guess is the stream that it goes through. So in order to be able to collect that data, they've got to store it to begin with, and then they've got to manipulate and do all the other bits and pieces. The cost of storage alone, let alone the cost of manipulation of the data in order to be able to get some information out of it, and then to be able to say, well, that's now knowledge, is immense. I mean, they're not doing this for fun, right? They're doing it because there's some end game somewhere along the line, and it's obviously going to be worth their while collecting that data in order to be able to, sort of like make decisions about, future product enhancements and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there was even some talk, and this is a little bit, I don't know, maybe it's a conspiracy thing. I don't know, because this all came through this article that I think we saw on the ABC. And some talk about sharing that information with insurers. So that was quite an interesting kind of maybe dark twist about sharing the driver's performance with insurers. Now, all this data is supposed to be anonymized, de-identified. And, you could sort of say that that's just really there to inform insurance companies about how drivers are generally driving vehicles, and that might affect the cohort rather than an individual. But if that's correct, it could just be speculation.
Yeah, Nick was traveling at 7 kilometers over the speed limit at the time that the other car hit him. Yeah.
Exactly. See, you put your
So
claim in,
therefore,
and,
it's all his fault.
yeah, you put your claim in, and then they look at the database and go, "Hang on a second."
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little bit of speculation, but this is why there's this need for one, as I say, practically, if you become aware of this, you need to go into the settings within the car and actually look at the privacy settings that are in there, and look at if you've got some options to opt out. I
That's
think
good advice. Yeah. So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that, as I say, I think that the privacy actually is not going to help. The changes coming through, and look, I mean, with this first tranche, I mean, they're probably going to take at least a year to actually become operational, because there'll be a transition in period. And like I say, they focus on things like increasing powers to the regulator, giving them the ability to hand out more infringement notices, different tiers in terms of penalties against entities. It's got some stuff around an online policy to protect children. So there's various things like
Well,
that.
that's useful. Yeah.
There's a new tort for serious invasions of privacy. So individuals can, if they've had their privacy invaded, that they can bring an action in relation to that. So there's a new thing there. But as like I say, this is all sort of fairly non-controversial stuff. All the controversial stuff has been, pushed to, who knows, probably beyond the next election. So really, unfortunately, it's up to the individual to educate themselves, inform themselves about what it is they're signing up to, whether it's with their vehicle or anything else, and kind of fit and try and figure out what do these companies actually want out of me in terms of personal information.
Yeah. So they've pushed Claire O'Neill off into housing now, because housing is a big problem, and she was a bit of a firebrand and made sure that people were aware of what was going on. But off now, maybe it's been watered down, as you say, because there's another election coming up, and nobody wanted any controversy over it's being made more difficult for us to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And whether it's right or wrong, I mean, I take the view that ethically and morally we've got to be on the right side of history, But it seems that a few other people out there not necessarily thinking that.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, I don't want to get too political, but I think that's just the reality is this close to an election, particularly given where the incumbent government is at the moment and the struggles it's got on at the moment, that they'd probably want to minimise any more controversial changes in the next 6 months or so.
Okay, that's cool. So, I guess Robert, the so we're keeping this short and sharp. Couple of things that have come out today are the fact that if you really do care about the data and what you do, you've got to be a little bit more vigilant. You've got to go into the systems in order to be able to understand whether you have got your privacy settings set up correctly in your vehicle now, let alone just your desktop or your laptop or your iPad or your whatever it is. You've got to go a little bit further now if you've got one of those devices. Be vigilant, and there's no law currently that's going to save us, coming to save us. Everything's been watered down quite significantly. So there's a new Cyber Act coming, but I mean we can talk about that at a different time. And there's obviously some updates to SOCI which need to be looked at some point. I guess the point for me is the fact that we seem to be going backwards when the rest of the world is actually, sort of projecting forward. GDPR is a big step forward in terms of understanding the fact that guardians of the data really do need to act like guardians of the data. And, they've even taken this whole thing to heart with regards to IDAS as part of GDPR. And they've enhanced IDAS, which is basically a digital transformation which takes you from, sort of having to print documents off to being able to sign them with a date stamp and all the other bits and pieces over in Europe. So, it's kind of sad that we're not there yet ourselves. Maybe there's something that we can do going forward that would actually pressure a new government into making that decision.
Yeah, or if Labour gets back in, then maybe they'll take up the bit between their teeth in terms of probably reforming the Privacy Act. I mean, I think discussions around reform of the Privacy Act have been going on for at least 6 years, if not longer. And again, the other thing that we've seen some major data breaches, but no consequences yet.
Yeah, and there's the point, Robert.
Yeah.
And there's the point that's really sort of just, sort of like disconcerting, I suppose, for myself, is the fact that lobbying has been carried out over the last 6 years to say, hey, we need some enhancements here. That was then. And the hackers and the people that are abusing the data are like light years ahead of where the rest of us are currently. They quite clearly know that there's value in that data. We're being told every day that, data is the new oil. It's got to have it. So yeah, maybe that's something that we do need to consider.
Yeah, look, we know this data breach is a big business, and unfortunately, you're right. It's sad. So Europe, the US take the lead when it comes to introducing new regulations around whether it's data breach or AI or whatever it might be in the technology sphere, and of course we know that governments are generally years behind where the hackers are. So it's constant catch up, and unfortunately, it seems as though Australia's at the back of the queue in terms of making the reforms that are necessary to bring us up to speed. So there's a lot of talk about changes coming, and there's been, like you suggest, there's a whole bunch of other changes coming through, from the Standalone Cybersecurity Act to other changes to SOCI and so forth. But we need to get these in place, and we need to be constantly updating these as much as we can, and changing behaviors. And part of changing behaviors is enforcement. We need to see consequences.
Yeah, maybe that's something that we should take up next week. So the objective here is to give people a short hit about some of the things that are going on. Maybe next week what we can do is delve in a little bit further and maybe give some examples about, sort of like where these things are going on, just like the car thing. And we'll work out from here, sort of like highlight a few things that we're beginning to see in terms of trending information. I am concerned about the fact that, quite clearly companies would not be storing all this data because there's a great deal of cost associated with it. And then, sort of manipulation of that data as an additional load of cost as well. So there's quite clearly, some kind of agenda going on. And if those guys are that far ahead of the curve in terms of what they see the value in, where they see the value, then we've got to be, sort of trying to get as much information out to people so that they know what to be looking out for.
That's right. So yeah, I think it's important to be educated, be aware, and for now, it's up to the individual consumer or customer to actually go in and understand what information is being gathered, and if they need to change those settings, change those settings. I think the other practical tip that it came out of that ABC article, there was a website that was mentioned, privacyforcars.com. It's not necessarily Australian focused, but again, it might be quite helpful in terms of enabling individuals to figure out how to get into those privacy settings within vehicles.
Okay, perfect. Robert, it's absolutely fantastic seeing you again. Look forward to catching up next week. And thank you so much for your time and your insight. This is Nick Lovell signing off for Data Protection Services. This was Chat DPS. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Nick.